Matt Rhoads, welcome to Competencies Without a Classroom. I'm super excited to have you here. You and I have had the chance to get to know each other a fair bit this last year or so. So I'm really looking forward to our guests also having the same opportunity to get to know you as well. But before we jump into that fun stuff and learn a bit more about you, Matt, we start every episode of this podcast with the same question. And it helps to set a bit of a tone for the rest of the interview. It's also the question that our listeners want an answer to. So with that, Matt Rhoads, when it comes to pineapple on pizza, are you a yes or a no on that one?
I'm a definite no. I don't feel like it goes well at all. I like a lot of things on my pizza, but I don't like pineapple.
Is there anything else that you think people would disagree with that you like on your pizza? Like, are you an anchovies kind of person or?
Anchovies as well. I'm not an anchovy person in general, although I like all different types of meats on my pizza. I like different types of vegetables. I like pepperoncinis and those type of things that make
Yep.
it spicy as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm open to have like a wide variety of things, even like artichokes on my pizza. Maybe that's something that someone would prefer not to have, but I just think there's just different these taste preferences that are everyone
100%.
has their own thing for. So it's totally cool. It's just certain things like pineapples, anchovies, I don't like.
No, that makes sense. It's a very divisive topic, which is why I love to start off with it. It's pretty close. Pineapple, I think, is squeaking by in the lead, but we'll see what happens at the end of the season. So Matt, who is Matt Rhoads and what are you doing for work right now?
So my day job includes I'm a secondary special education teacher and I teach math this year, but I've taught social sciences, English at the secondary level, and I also teach university students integrating ed tech in their instruction as well as supervising them as they are in their clinical practice. So I provide coaching and mentoring to them. So those are the two things that I do for like my day job. And then my other things include writing books, writing two right now. One's coming out in June. I do some consulting work. I like doing podcasts with being a guest on ones like yours, as well as going to be starting my own in April, and blogging and just researching, just tons of different things. I mean, I think that's just kind of a lot of side hustle things, but all related to education.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say you found your fit, right? You picked the right path, and there's no limit to the number of opportunities you can do within your 9 to 5 or beyond that, and that's a very lucky thing that you're grateful to have, to know that you found the thing for you, right?
I think maybe 15 to 20 years ago that probably wouldn't exist.
That's part of the journey, right? So I mean, speaking of your books, Matt, what's one that is published, since we're talking about it, that our listeners can go and check out?
Yeah, so right now I have one that's published. It's called Navigating the Toggled Term, and it is preparing secondary educators for navigating fall 2020 and beyond. And then my next one that's coming out in June is Navigating the Toggled Term, a guide for K-12 classroom and school leaders. So that one's for pre-sale right now.
Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. And we'll link to those in the show notes. It sounds pretty topical for everything that's happening right now. So I'm excited to get my hands on it as well. Matt, let's jump into the meat of the conversation, right? Now that we know a bit more about yourself. The main reason we're doing season 2 is because season 1 of the podcast was focused on interviewing industry professionals. So the CEOs, the hiring managers of your workplaces, talking about what are the 21st century skills that they're looking for when building out their 21st century teams. And more than that, what do they look like in action? So now we have a much better sense of what those skills are and how, as a student, we can showcase and tell a story of how we put those skills into action. One of the things I'm trying to do with season 2, though, is amplify the voice of the educator, because we know that there are many teachers doing really great things in the classroom when it comes to developing those skills. But in my personal view, a lot of times those stories are siloed, right? Teachers can be very humble. They may not be on a soapbox talking about what they're doing in their class every day. They're busy people. So I'm trying to use this as an opportunity to let other teachers learn from some of those teachers who are proactively and intentionally developing those 21st century skills in their students. So, I mean, on that, Matt, I'm a teacher. I'm listening to this right now. What's something that you can speak to from something you've done in your classroom to help students develop one of these 21st century skills?
Yeah, so over the past couple years, I've been really focusing on the idea of reflection and metacognition. So essentially allowing the students to first self-assess where they are with their feelings, with their academics, with how they're interacting with others in the classroom, how they feel like their effort and participation has been, and providing a number of different outlets for them to do that, whether that's a form or whether that is having them go on to Flipgrid and articulate that, providing opportunities during synchronous learning where they're working on like an interactive slide, they put, how they're feeling, or there's a short little rubric there, and we share that to the class, and then we have an opportunity for students to talk about it at the very end of the lesson to reflect and summarize, did they understand what happened, what did we talk about, and just kind of relate to how the conversation go with maybe other students or with me. Was my feedback good? So I think those have been really the biggest things I've been focusing on, especially during this last school year, because so much has been occurring where we don't have control over. And I think having the ability to self-assess our feelings, our emotions, and how we're doing in relation to our learning through, talking about it or writing about it has really given students an opportunity to build those metacognition reflection skills that are essential for such a changing world that we live in.
Yeah. And thank you for doing that. It's such an important skill for students to be able to, you hit a number of them, right? Self-reflection, metacognition, right? Self-actualization. You're going to learn a lot more about who you are, how you think, and what you want just by getting in the habit of doing these daily reflections. You talked a little bit about the rubric piece, Matt. Let's get granular. Do you prompt students on what to reflect on? Do you give them certain, say, hey, this is an example of X, or is it more kind of open-ended and they just share their feelings?
Yeah, so there's both. So sometimes it's scaffolded. So I provide like the rubric itself, and then they answer the rubric by doing a draggable, or it's on a form itself. Or for example, if I want them to talk about something, sometimes I provide a mentor text where I give my example of what I would say. And then I would say, can you produce something about how you're feeling about this? Or I would model by talking out loud, how I feel relation to, what's going on in my life, what I'm learning, etc. And by modeling that, either by writing it or by articulating it verbally, then that provides my students with the necessary scaffold to then do it themselves. And that's more front loaded at the beginning of the year versus towards now where we're at in this school year, because I've seen it so much. But that's generally what I like to do.
That makes sense. You're leading by example. You're sharing how you would do it, and they can see it in action and apply it themselves. Yeah. And like you said, it's front loaded, but through habit becomes easier and easier. And if it's something that we do every year with our student, it's just second nature, right?
So routines are everything.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in that as well. Yeah. So speaking of routines, Matt, you have some great routines that you've put into place over the years, so much so that congrats, you've now been promoted to superintendent for the next 10 minutes. But as your job, one of the first things you've been tasked with is deciding one of these skills. So one of these core competencies or 21st century skills that all of your graduating students need to display evidence of in their portfolio in order to graduate. If you could only pick one, what's that one skill?
I would say within any digital portfolio, if a student can create a reflection over the course of like a week or a unit of study or etc. about discussing like, what did they learn? What did they do with it? What's an example of what they did with it? And then what did they do well in? And then how can they improve within that one blog post? Then ultimately, as someone that's reading their blog in the future, maybe I'm a future employer, then I can see that that person is willing to learn, adapt, and be resilient, because workplaces are changing. There's going to be jobs that are changing in the next 5 to 10 years that don't even exist. So we want people that are able to learn the skills that are required for that job. And I think the idea of being able to reflect and summarize what they learn and show what they're able to do with their learning, and then articulate, what they did well versus what they need to improve in, then that's going to put them in a position to be a lifelong learner. And I think digital portfolios can really provide that vision so that anyone can see that from that person.
Exactly. It makes it visual and allows students to really articulate many of the things that you just talked about that are going to be so important moving forward. So it's a great answer. Matt, let's transition to a couple of rapid fire questions for you. So what's a life skill that you weren't taught in high school, but maybe that you wish that you were?
It's interesting that you say that because I think things have changed so much, even though I feel like it hasn't been that long since I've been out of high school. It's been a decade,
Yeah.
although things have changed around us. So I think that if one life skill would be able to more micromanage everything that is going on in my life. I mean, I think everyone has varying levels of what we call executive functioning. And I think just the idea of being able to create those boundaries of like, when is it too much of what I'm trying to do versus too less. And I wish that in school I was taught the ability to micromanage that better, because I think that during our time in high school was you need to achieve as much as possible. You need to be in all the advanced classes. You need to show that you're getting A's in them to get into a top university.
Right.
And ultimately, if you're thinking about like life balance and micromanaging everything in your life, that's probably not necessarily the best thing, because you're going to be doing too much and you could put yourself into the position of burning out. So I would say that, in short, that being able to micromanage these boundaries would be something that I wish that was something I was able to learn.
I think that's huge, right? Like I often internalize that as prioritization, right? There's only so many hours in a day. You can only do so much. And if you really want, you can assign like a weight to the things you're doing. So maybe the things that are worth the 80, or they're going to be a lot more important than the things that are worth 20. So focus your time and effort there, and being able to reflect, you're probably going to have the self-actualization to know when you're burning out and when you're getting tired, to focus on the 80, not try to do the 80 and the 20 because it's just too much, right? And yeah,
100%.
that was not something that I was ever intentionally taught in high school. Luckily, I mean, we're moving towards that direction, but there's still, again, depending on the school and the culture and where you're at, there's a lot of that got to get straight A's, got to go mentality. It's slowly starting to change, but we're still need to have many more conversations like this to allow students to know how important it is to not burn out. Right?
Definitely.
Cool. Matt, you have a billboard. Everyone's going to see that billboard and you can write one thing on it. What does it say?
Do people even look at billboards anymore? That's the question that I'm going to ask you.
That could be on the billboard. I mean, at Times Square they do. Yeah.
I mean, I think that most of the billboards I see now are on my computer, or just like advertisements I see. So I would say this random question that just popped in my head, are like, what are you looking up online? Is a question mark. And it'd be like a question mark, and it'd be maybe Google or some sort of search browser that would be the one that was advertising it. I mean, because I think everything's just so run in the digital age that you don't necessarily, I mean, I don't even think about looking at billboards or really signs on roads anymore, because everything is done digitally through my phone, where if I'm actually having to try and find directions, I just listen to it in my audio.
Yeah.
And
let me rephrase it this way then for you, Matt. So when you go to facebook.com, and before you put in your login credentials, there's a message on that screen. So everybody's going to see it. What's an important takeaway or message that you would want all the young people listening to this to see before logging in?
I would say, don't believe everything you say. I mean, don't believe everything that you see or what other people are saying, because anyone can say anything or post anything. And honestly, is that legitimate?
Yeah, it's a huge.
That's essentially what I would be writing on any sort of social media platform, is that big disclaimer, like big letters, is that don't believe anyone.
Yeah, I mean maybe we should petition Facebook to put that as their kind of login page, because yeah, you're right. Don't wait for the Twitters and the Facebooks to label things as potentially misleading. Use your critical thinking abilities that you're developing in school to really analyze how much weight you should be putting behind that message, right? Did you have a favorite class in high school growing up, Matt?
I liked history class quite a bit. I just liked if a teacher was able to provide like a narrative of the historical events, that always seemed to really engage me. I always liked the idea of if someone's able to really tell a good story, and I think history provides that content where you're able to give that story, and you can also show like images and things that are related to it. So that always seemed to engage me. So I loved history class for that.
Good answer. I mean, I always, in my experience, the history teachers that I had were some of the more passionate storytellers and definitely captivated the room. Did you have a favorite period in history that you find most interesting?
Yeah, I enjoyed, for example, like 14th century to modern day European history,
Cool.
just so much that occurred during that time. And then as an adult, being able to go travel and
Yeah.
see those places myself has, really just made it that much more real. And just having that background knowledge about going places and seeing things and actually talking to people and immersing yourself there, it just makes it seem a lot more like of a genuine experience.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, for me, it was very similar. Like World War II, I was fascinated by it. I still am, learned a lot about it. And then I had the chance as a teenager to go and visit, Normandy and the beaches and a lot of these historical sites in Vimy Ridge. And yeah, it hits home. It's that much more meaningful when you had the pretext to put into play when you're there.
Yeah,
Right?
100%.
Cool. So Matt, writing books. I'm assuming that means you're also reading books. What's a book that you've read that has had such an impact on you that maybe you wish you would have read it before your 18th birthday?
I would like to talk about the book. It's called Everybody Lies, and it is a New York Times bestseller. It's called Everybody Lies: Big Data, New Data, and What the Internet Can Tell You About who we really are. So basically, the author utilizes search data from all the major platforms, and it just talks about how, essentially human beings are liars, but at the same time, we can learn a lot about each other and our behavior by looking at our search data, and our search data is going to be far more accurate than what people actually tell you.
Yeah.
When you're speaking to them. And it just shows like trends. For example, people generally there's less homicides when a new release in a movie theater comes out. It like lowers dramatically. We can use search data to predict the flu. I'm sure we can predict COVID outbreaks just by the amount of people searching up COVID or COVID treatment with our browsers. And we can use platforms like Twitter as well to see what people are talking about in terms of trends. So this book really just does talk about it. And I mean, I think that given that I think the internet just exploded during the time that I've been in school, just having an idea of just how people behave and just what we're actually thinking is important. And just seeing that, being able to see that with the big data, and anyone, you and I, can access that data and look at it.
That's fascinating. I mean, we'll link to that in the show notes along with everything else we've talked about. I'm going to pick that one up.
You should pick it up. It's an amazing book. It's kind of life-changing.
Yeah. A lot of the books, have around this idea of behavioral psychology and trying to figure out why people act the same or the way they act. And, you hit the nail on the head. Like humans lie, but your search history doesn't. And being able to big data and data in general is, such an important scale. Like there's so many jobs available right now for people who can understand, visualize, then tell a story with data. So it'd be really interesting to hear some of the stories they were.
Yeah, no, that's one of the things that before COVID I was really working on. As my dissertation and everything was on data efficacy and just being able to understand data. And one of my goals is I've written a draft of a book of data literacy for educators. I just gotta finish it all. But I think it's just like, this is like the cutting edge future. And if you're able to harness it and know what to do with it, then it's really powerful.
Awesome, man. Another one to look out for. Matt, if you had a magic wand, you could change one thing about the education system as we know it today. What would you use your wand to do?
Oh man, there's so many different things that we can do. I would say with our education system is to get rid of all the major yearly assessments, the state testing, because I find it to be not as valuable as formative assessment. And we can embed small state assessments within the formative assessments that can take 15 to 20 minutes to administer. And you can do that multiple times throughout the year versus why are we spending 3 weeks working on a state assessment? So I think that getting rid of these summative state assessments and then integrating, more formative assessments into our curriculum that we can use for state indicators as well as for teachers to use and educators to use at that point in time, to me, that's so much more valuable than these state testing. And I also want to get rid of standardized tests for university entry, as I don't feel like there's any sort of indicator for them that demonstrates future success. So I mean, if those are just two clear-cut things we could get out, I would get those out like tomorrow.
The world, maybe this is true for some and not for others, but the world is not standardized. So, I always come
100%.
back to that picture, that, the Einstein picture of the test is climbing a tree, and one of the animals happens to be a fish. Fish can't climb a tree, but be able to swim laps around you in the pool, right? And yeah, so there's a lot of data there too. I mean, there is data to prove that just because you scored high on those standardized tests, it doesn't necessarily correlate to doing well academically and in post-secondary and future indicators of traditional success, right? So yeah, that's a whole another podcast in and of itself, but I am 100% on board with you, Matt. So to wrap it up, you talked about your books, you're doing a ton of work on the side from above and beyond the classroom itself. Where can I, as a listener, go to learn more about Matt Rhoads and check out some of the books that you're working on?
So you can go to matthewrhoads.com and check out all my work there, blog, etc. And then a lot more stuff is coming relating to my new book that's launching in June. Probably when this podcast is released, it'll be up on the website, and then my podcast will also be linked on my website as well. So I hope that you have a time to check it out.
Yeah, and we'll link to everything that we can link to in the show notes of this. So Matt, I can't thank you enough, man. Really appreciate taking the time to share your story, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.